moment when you actually get to talk. So tell us about this blood test. She was telling me that you've got some fantastic things that are coming out about that.
Interesting question. I want to show you just a few minutes of what happens when most cancers develop. This is using breast as an example, but most cancers go through the same process. Originally, you start with normal tissue. In the case of breast, it's ducts. And then they become abnormal over time. And so a lot of the patients that were treated with this ductal carcinoma in situ when the cancer's actually first there in the duct, when we call it cancer for the first time. And then some of the patients are now, from your generosity, from starting the trials in patients with invasive cancer, the ones that it's broken through the duct wall have been treated with the vaccines after they receive chemotherapy and other things. So all the cancers will do this, even lung cancer. So this is busy, you don't have to, there's a lot of things that are happening right at the interface of where your cells are on the cancer, and the outside and the inside. And if you look at that little double braided end is the membrane of the cells from the tumor, and there's things sticking through it, and the things that are sticking through that are often the things that drive the cell, take signals from the outside and tell the cell to grow or to spread or to do something. And so we're using those things that are sticking out of the cells that drive the cancer, we call them oncodrivers, to target them, to eliminate them, or to put them to sleep. And in breast cancer, most breast cancers have estrogen receptors on them, but what you don't realize is that the estrogen, which is ER there, it does actually interact with those drivers that are on the cells. So when you take anti-estrogen, you can block that, but you don't necessarily block the drivers. So we're blocking the drivers at the same time people are taking the anti-estrogens to make them more effective. You might have to take them for less, have less side effects. Most cancers start and follow the path of what normally happens. And the breast is a perfect example of this because you start out with an immature breast, and most women don't realize this, but your breast doesn't finally mature until you have your first child, until you go through a whole full-term pregnancy. And as any woman can tell you who's breastfed, their breasts enlarge, and when they finish breastfeeding, they retract. And when they retract after lactation, that's where we think the immune response is playing a big role in breast cancer development. So it's during that phase of pregnancy and lactation. If you look in premenopausal women, there's a spike in breast cancer occurrence within 5 years of any pregnancies. And some of that probably drags on even later. Most of those probably happen from remnants of these breast ducts that actually grow into the fat, just like cancer would. It just invade the fat to grow, but they're doing it in a controlled fashion. And the reason why they're controlled is because the immune response is there holding it back. And just to show you, these are different drivers that are involved that we found in breast cancer. And almost, if you see the purple piece of pie up there, that's where we found none. So it's very few. All the rest have some kind of one of these driver molecules on the surface that are driving these tumors. So they're very common. If you look in people who have a benign breast biopsy or healthy donors up in the top, and you look, this is an immune response against one of these drivers that's on the surface, it's pretty darn good. People are walking around with a good immune response against something that causes breast cancer. But if someone starts to get breast cancer, that light peach bar, that's the DCIS that's starting, they start losing that immune response, but they still have some of it. So those people do pretty darn well. And I actually think the reason why the mammographers find them on the mammogram is not because you get lucky and go for a mammogram, it's because your immune system held that up so you can see it on a mammogram. And those calcifications are the result of the immune cells that are fighting, doing a little battle. Some of the tumor cells die, and then the mammographers see them as calcifications on a mammogram. Unfortunately, some people don't ever experience that, and they lose that immune response last. And if you look, people that have HER2-positive breast cancer, they've actually lost that whole immune response. It's gone. We don't know exactly why they lose it, but for some reason, the tumor really wants to get rid of that immune response. And with HER2 positive breast cancer, for those of you that don't know, it's one of the more aggressive breast cancers. It's got free will. So if you don't have an immune response anymore, think of an AIDS person with AIDS. The same cell that the AIDS virus infects is the same cell that breast cancer knocks out. The funny thing is, it keeps all the immune response to everything else. It's just fine. So you can fight bacteria, you can do everything, but you lose that specific immune response. This is now out in a couple papers, and this is actually a very exciting finding, because what it suggests is this is done on blood. So we may have a way to predict if somebody's at risk to develop a breast cancer by looking at if they're losing that immune response. Everything else everybody's looking at is looking to find the tumor. We're looking to find what the immune response is doing to tell us that there might be a problem going on. So that's, and the same thing, Megan, who you met too, is doing the same thing with another oncodriver. There's multiple oncodrivers that we're looking at this in melanoma and also in other kinds of breast cancers, ER positive breast cancers and triple negative. And you go to the next slide. This is in pictures what happens. So if somebody's healthy and their breast is doing fine, they have a nice immune response that's sitting there taking care of it. When they start to get DCS, they start to lose some of that immune response, but it's still there. So it does give them some protection against really bad stuff. But if they really keep losing it, or if they lose it very early on, you're going to get into invasion. And this happens even when the tumor's 1 millimeter. It doesn't take stage 4 to get this. This happens very early. And you can actually take this blood test and you can predict, looking at the immune response in the blood, whether somebody's going to completely respond to chemotherapy and anti-HER2 therapy, or whether they're not. And he can do it by looking at the immune response. If the immune response comes back and it's there, their tumor's going to be wiped out by chemo. If it's not, they're still going to have disease there. This is just to show that the same thing with recurrence is happening in triple negative breast cancer with HER3. You see people that keep their immune response against HER3 who don't have recurrence. If you lose that immune response against HER3, you got problems. You're going to get a recurrence. And you see, I put up here just to show you that's a tetanus response. So most people are vaccinated against tetanus. Those people keep their immune response against tetanus. And just like other yeast, they keep their immune response against it. They just lose it against the driver of the cancer. If this holds true, we can take different kinds of cancers, pancreas, melanoma, lung, brain, colon, and we can take these drivers and we can look at the immune response to them, and we can detect the problem early on when it's first starting. Imagine pancreatic cancer, which right now there's no screening for, and most people end up dying from it because even when we detect it early, it's too late. Imagine if we could identify these immune responses to the drivers that are lost, then you can really start screening somebody or correct this immune response. So there's lots of things we can do with this as a blood test that's a little bit different than the way we look at blood tests now in the medical field, where we try to find the tumor. We're trying to find let the immune response tell us where the problems are. So we want solutions to this. So one of the solutions, maybe you can modify your diet and do other things to try to correct that immune response. Another way is to simply fix the immune response. Take the immune response and give it back to the person that lost it. And so I'm going to give you some examples of this, and this is exactly the procedure we've done on the patients that you have seen up here tonight. It's fairly simple. We get some blood from them, we activate their immune cells. On this slide, I just wanted to show you that people who have invasive breast cancer, these black bars first, have lost that immune response. It's pretty darn low. And if you give them chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, the red box, it doesn't move that immune response very much. It doesn't really do anything for it. But on the other hand, if you take those same patients in the black bars here, but you give them that vaccine to kick their immune response, now look at the green bars. All that immune reaction that they didn't have is now back. And they're now back to the same place that healthy people are. And these are actually people that we gave these vaccines to that we thought maybe had DCIs at the beginning, but it turned out that they had invasive cancer. And that immune response lived through chemotherapy, and it stays there. And every one of those patients that's on this graph has never had a problem. They got chemo Herceptin, and they got their immune response back, and they've all done fine. In fact, there's been a few patients that didn't even get chemo with this that are doing fine with just that vaccine. How about people who have more advanced disease? Can we do something for them? So we started to ask, with your help, I think it was last year, whether we could give vaccines to people who had that residual disease, the ones that I showed you on the graph that they only have a few CD4s left and their tumor didn't all go away. What about if we could give them a vaccine after they finished all their therapy, rather than just have them sit there and say, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do until this comes back. So we started to vaccinate people this year on 2 different trials. We have patients who are stage 4, which you saw Debbie talk about, and there's also patients that had just finished their chemo, but they had disease left when we operated on them. And so we vaccinated them. I'm just going to show you the first 4. This is what, so look at where their immune responses started from in the before, pretty low. And within a couple months, their immune responses all nicely come up against that HER2 oncodriver. So they're actually getting up to the point where they're just around where healthy people are looking. So we're hopeful that that's going to translate for them into not having any further problems with their breast cancer. So I like to think of this a little bit like cancer is Superman. It's pretty indestructible. We throw chemo at it, we throw radiation at it, we throw surgery at it, and it still finds a way to live. When we give targeted therapies like Herceptin, like chemo, but our dendritic cell immunization is a little bit more like kryptonite to Superman. And if you get the right combination, we can bring cancer down. And we're going to be looking at this now, as I said, in melanoma, and colon cancer, and lung cancer, and a lot of the other tumors. Because the same drivers that are driving them are also driving a lot of these other solid tumors. And just to give you just one last second, because Debbie brought this up, she actually, sometimes when we vaccinate patients against one of these drivers, the immune response is smart and it'll pick up against multiple of them. And Debbie mentioned to you that they found a brain tumor in me. Well, it was kind of interesting. She sent me a photo. She was going back and forth to Florida. And she sent me a picture on my cell phone of a rash that she got on her back after her fifth vaccination. And we know from looking at that, most of the patients, it takes them a little while before that immune response really starts kicking in. And I said to her, don't worry about it, I've seen this before. Patients have an anti-EGFR or anti-HER1 immune response, it'll be fine. She then got her 6th vaccination. It was after that she got the symptoms of her brain. They took it out, and the pathologist actually called me because they said there's something very unusual. They took this tumor out and they looked at it, and they said there's really a lot of necrosis in this thing, and there's a lot of CD4 cells. And so the neurosurgeon said this vaccine had nothing to do with this. This is just dumb luck. So I actually had the pathologist go through and stain her brain tumor for the oncodrivers. We did her 1 or 2 or 3 and c-MET. And although HER2 was gone, that's what we vaccinated with her. I couldn't tell maybe the immune response had gotten rid of all her HER2, but they did find a lot of HER1 expression, which is a relative of HER2. And lo and behold, when we got her blood from her and looked at her immune response was the highest to that HER1. And so our theory is that we jumped that immune response up, the cells then went in there and started to kill that tumor, made some inflammation, gave her the symptom that found that tumor that was taken out. And we're hopeful that, because they actually were thinking about giving her radiation, but actually the radiation oncologist thought now that we vaccinated her that may protect her just fine. So there's a lot of work to do is what I got to say, and we need all your help to do this. This is not something that Gary or I or the guys in the lab can just whip up money and make this happen. The potential is there, and we're hoping that you join with us and help us end this, so we don't have to hear stories like Mike just told you about hearing that his brother died of cancer, and everyone in this room, I'm sure, has a story of someone who they've either a relative, a friend, or somebody that's touched their life that was affected by cancer. And so we want to make this kind of a true history, but really the key is going to be getting this stuff early before it even develops, and that's what we're really excited about for the blood test and the immune response, is really going after the stuff before it really gets going.
Brian, thanks so much. Thank you very much.